So just briefly today, let's do a quick recap in terms of just as a refresher in terms of what we covered so far. This unit, I personally love this unit because I'm a techie guy, so I love technology, and I think from my perspective, you're working within the industry, you have seen how the change has happened within the industry in terms of at least at your place of work itself. And you know how technology has made a difference with mobile phone, for example, in our personal lives, tablets, the internet. And this has, obviously had a great impact on the place of work as well. And I think we see technology all around us today, even if you pick up a set of operations within the, tourism and hospitality sector, whether it's a restaurant, 24-hour coffee shops, the way you pay, the way you pay for the service, check out, check in, do a reservation, do a booking, order something from the room. You're always using some part of technology, which is what we've covered in Learning Outcome 1. So things like a telephone system, if you're looking at an entertainment or a movie that you're ordering from the entertainment shop or whatever they call it in different hotels, the TV, which wasn't there about 30 years back in the hotels. You had go into the lounge or the coffee shop to watch news, but now having TVs within your own room, things like mini bars and all the technology in the mini bar, which allows the front office to quickly check what has been used and what needs to be replenished, is all because of technology. So that was the background in Learning Outcome 1. In 2, we looked at understanding some of the systems. These are individual technology or developments that we've discussed. They're all standalone. They can be used all standalone if it's a small operation. But if you look at a bigger operation like a hotel, which offers lots of services, here at some stage you have to start integrating all the different forms of technologies so that the system is able to give you some sort of a structured output. And that, in a crude way, is the integration of all these systems into one to create something called MIS, or Management Information System. And the reason why it is called management is because it allows you to take decisions or allows you to get summary reports or data which is tabulated into some sort of reports, which then makes it meaningful for the person looking at that to be able to use it for further, say for example, some sort of a use or making a decision, or in some cases providing that as further information to senior people in the senior management, which will look at doing some further calculations or further processing on that data to take out meaningful information or knowledge from there. And then we looked at the concept of, if we expand this into some sort of a portal and look at how this system can be managed working globally. To a certain extent, we look at global distribution systems, or DGS, which allow different consumers, different types of stakeholders like partners, suppliers, government, owners, directors, employees, customers to all log in and have access to relevant information. In this case, then that kind of a system which is able to provide information in real time and has right restricted information access for different types of stakeholders would be classified as something called a GDS, or a global distribution system. And a simple example of that we've looked at is the website. When you look at Travel Supermarket, Kayak, or you look at websites like TOI, Thomson, which today started off, or a couple of years back, maybe a decade back, started off as operators which were only looking at doing hotel reservations. Slowly and gradually, if you look at Jet2, has started to offer things like flights, hotels, cars, taxis, or personalized experiences in all locations, and that is what they call is now a package holiday. So all that has been possible because of the growth of growth of the sector, but also in terms of the integration of technology and the use of technology happening in this sector, which led to the creation of MIS. The big brother of that could be the global distribution system. And then when internet has become quite prevalent, if you look at the late 2005, 2006 onwards, the emergence of something called the online travel agencies, which started to replace traditional tour operators because of various factors. These factors could have been things like the world becoming smaller because it's becoming connected, travel became cheaper and easier, all forms of travel became possible for consumers, like travel through sea, train, road, or by air. And as it becomes affordable, as the economic data coming out from countries also makes it easier for people to afford holidays, the emergence of and the integration of technology with the connectivity allowed online travel agencies to flourish. which have become an integral part of the supply chain or the ecosystem, and this allows the availability of real-time data to be made available to consumers. In the third learning outcome, we studied the impact of internet in particular, how internet is becoming important, the importance of social media, importance of how information can be provided almost instantly, and some part of it is that the spend which the operators and companies are doing in terms of traditional forms of advertising has decreased, and the digital form of advertising has increased, because now PC is not the only device which gives you access to the internet or information, but there are multiple different types of devices like smartphones, tablets, e-readers, things like e-books and all that, e-notebooks or Chromebooks, which allow you to browse and surf the internet, have accessibility to the data, and that is where it has become important as a strategy for all companies to not ignore but integrate internet marketing into their overall marketing strategy. And social media has become a key part of it. And then we looked at some bits of understanding in terms of what is the relationship between the online travel agencies, because it allows the companies to sell their products not just in a particular geography but globally, and that can be done by providing real-time information using the medium of online travel agencies. And these tend to be specialists in all sectors, things like airlines. So you look at airlines, you'll have a couple of them like Kayak, there is Travelocity. There are a couple of them which are just focused on air travel. Then there are a few which are focused on hotels like bookings.com. And then there are a few which are like Travel Supermarket, which primarily are one-stop shop or aggregator portals, which have become predominantly quite popular for comparison purposes when customers want to look at everything in terms of information on one single site.
Yeah.
Now, in the last learning outcome, we are looking at covering something like understanding, the ethical implications of usage of technology. So technology has also, has made things easier, but overuse of technology, maintenance of data, and a lot of personal information being stored away on the internet or on data servers also means that it is prone to some sort of a misuse if it is not handled properly. So that is what we are going to look at in terms of studying in learning outcome 4. So what are the legal implications of if the data is not managed properly and data gets leaked or hacked? What happens in that case and why it is important? Because there are lots of personal details which the travel agencies, hotels, wherever you go and travel, stay, actually have in terms of on file. And because it's all electronic, sometimes it is easier to retrieve, but easier also to retrieve from a negative connotation that if it falls in the hands of wrong people, then it can also have disastrous, effects or circumstances. Can basically mean that a lot of your data, information, detail can get leaked and can fall in wrong hands, which could be misutilized for various nefarious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so let's look at, in this context, we are looking at two broad things: understand why data protection is important, and then how security and what is the importance of security in the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry in particular. So let's look at understanding in a few slides first the two key main concepts that we want to look at. Now, if you look at why do you need to look at security? Just as a general term, why do we need to look at security? Whether it's security in terms of insurance that you get it done, or why are you looking at security in general? Whether it's in daily life, personal context, office, why do you need security? Any ideas on that?
We use security as like a safety net.
That is correct. So security, in a way, when you look at taking out an insurance or a policy or a safeguard, you're basically looking at a safety net or a safeguard, which is primarily to say that if something is to go wrong, I have something that I can fall back on, and that will provide me sort of a safety net. Now, within the tourism sector, we look at security from a different perspective. So the main thing would be security would be of different types. When I say different perspective, one could be physical security. It could be security in terms of property. Is the property secure? Now, that would mean, if it's a seaside property, Is it secure from, say, cyclones or hurricanes and things like that? Those are things that are also examples of security. But when you're living in the hotel, is there enough security to look after the guests and any imminent danger from, say, any other types of threat? So security in this sense could mean safety net. It could mean personal security, security and well-being of the physical infrastructure, and to a certain extent, it could also mean security against, say, natural disasters. Because if you're in a seaside resort, or when we look at a couple of years back when there was a tsunami in Indonesia, a lot of people lost their lives because there was not enough mechanism to predict that because of the earthquake which happened, that there will be a tsunami, and that kind of wiped out certain coastal towns, even in Japan when we look at after the Fukushima incident. So when we look at security, the existence and sustainability of the tourism sector to a certain extent depends on it, because of the fact that you tend to go and stay in places where you feel you have a bit of a safety net. You are going to be confident that I will be able to get those facilities or things which are required, or which I'm paying for as a service. But at the same time, you're also secure. You feel secure from a physical safety point of view, and that is where security could be looked at from a tourism perspective. Now, in a hotel, if we have to look at, say, for example, sometimes, so just to relate a point there, which I just thought of, is that sometimes you see that the governments also issue warnings in certain places, warning travelers or tourists not to travel to a particular destination. Now, that tends to happen is because we feel they have some information which will mean that they're trying to avoid natural disasters. Or, for example, last year when we looked at, there were wildfires in Portugal, and in Spain. So the British government had issued warnings to say, if you're looking at traveling to certain areas, please try and avoid these areas because of raging fires in that location. That could mean damage to property and life and loss of life. So sometimes you will see this is looked at from a political perspective as well, and the governments would look at putting out these warnings so that they can inform the members of public, people who are looking at traveling or going out on a vacation, to say that, okay, there is a forewarning which has been given because the area has already been identified as an area under threat because of whatever reason, natural disasters, security, in terms of terrorism, other areas.
Yeah.
So, and the other bit that we look at is, so when we look at physical security, we look at the context of, say, for example, what is the security in a hotel? Because the hotel has lots of different types of assets, infrastructure. You need a bit of security, obviously, in your house. Why don't you keep your doors open during the night? Because you need security, and you don't want your articles and other bits, important bits, to be stolen. So similarly, the literal meaning of security would also mean that you are looking at physically, protecting or hampering, the theft, which could happen potentially in places which have a high amount of, or basically valuables in a particular location.
Right.
So typically, when you look at hotel lobbies, you look at some of the locations when you go to a museum, or say you are attending, say, an event outside, there are reasons of having securities because you will be looking at protecting or safeguarding the physical infrastructure of that property. So in those cases, you will look at the availability of security officers, which will protect not just the guests, their physical well-being, but also look at their valuables, isn't it?
Yeah.
So these are things which we look at when we cover the issue of, or discuss the issue of security, or in general literally discuss what is security. Now, in hotels, if I have to look at, can you think of one or two reasons in terms of how things are looked at from a point of view of hotel security?
The safety of guests, the safety of guest valuables, the building in general,
assets
and the safety, and then the safety technology-wise, as has been mentioned about data.
That's correct. So when you look at safety, you have to use some implementations of technology to ensure that this is working. And in one case that we can think of is the implementation or the application of what is called the CCTV cameras or some sort of a monitoring system which allows some of these things to be monitored remotely. Because when we look at talking about hotels, estate, resorts, these are properties which kind of are let's say spread out in a number of acres. There's a lot of land and a lot of area that they cover. So if you look at a golf course, which is say for example a part of a resort, and customers have access to it, there is no way that physically you can have so many people looking and safeguarding security of the guests and also the property. So in those cases, the use of technology, which is the monitoring to CCTV, use of drone, aerial photography, things like that, allows the hotel or the resort in this case to look after and maintain security of the physical asset, resources, and also the guest in that location. Now, let's look at the other aspect of it, which is, we've spoken about and talked about, security from a perspective of physical assets, equipment, infrastructure, guests. What are the other forms of security? So what is, say, if you have to look at the word information security, if you have to look at information is as important because that information classifies, gives you background about the customer, its, his preferences or her preferences, and, some of the data that is stored within the systems. So when we look at the security and maintaining the security of that information, which is stored digitally within most of the hotel servers and travel agencies or tour operators, we need to look at something called how do we protect that data. So there are certain laws and legislations which are available, and one of the legislation which is available, say for example in the UK, is the Data Protection Act. Now this Data Protection Act was initially introduced in 1998 when government and other departments started to store data electronically for things like taxation, VAT data, or some of the data which was required related to medical data in the UK with the National Health Service. You look at your insurance contributions, other bits, which was data primarily going into the government related to an individual. And this act was introduced then, and this has now been updated, and it is now called the Data Protection Act of 2018, which means that it now includes something called the GDPR Act, which was a European-wide convention adopted to prevent the spread or misuse of data outside the EU. So if you are a EU citizen, your data cannot be exported outside the EU without the consent of the organization or the individual. And in this case, some of the regulation and the legislation was updated in the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and this is now an updated act which all companies which store data, like have personal details like passport, date of birth, name, address, email, will have to adhere to in order to ensure that the data which is stored has is obviously kept saved. Second, not everyone has access to the data, because in this case, the data protection officer, they have to nominate somebody within the organization, which is called the DPO, data protection officer, and that person has access to the data only under certain circumstances. And if there are other members of staff which need to get access to data, then the rights, user rights, be set, and proper permissions have to be taken with the paperwork has to be filed to say that why that data is being accessed by a different member of staff, because this data conforms to more or less the personal details of a customer or guest which is stayed in a particular location or a hotel. So when we look at the concept of usage of technology to look at determining security and the security of data which is stored because of because most of the information now is stored electronically, we look at the concept of security and also look at the concept of Data Protection Act. And in different countries there is a similar act which basically follows through, might have a slightly different name, but the literal meaning of that legislation from the government is to make sure that one, the data is stored safely if it's stored digitally. The user has the access to the data. The user can write to the organization to say that can you delete or remove my data, and can check with an organization under this act to ensure and find out in writing that what data are you storing about the individual, about myself. And last but not the least, not everyone will have access to this data. So the access to this data is going to be basis the user right management, which is set within the organization. There has to be a policy, and only relevant people which are having the permissions to access this data or have direct connection with, accessing this data for various reasons would be allowed access to it. And after a period of 6 years, I think most organizations store it for 6 years. And after the period of 6 years has elapsed, if the data is no longer required, that needs to be, securely wiped off or deleted, from the servers. Now, let's look at addressing some of the assessment criteria here. So when we look at what is the importance of security in this sector with regards to the implementation of technology. So a few points that I put together is which we briefly discussed, but a few points are that with internet and connectivity now being available, what has happened is that some part of the data which is stored, it needs to be protected by the use of firewalls, by use of software which prevents unauthorized access or access to that data from outside, right? And that would mean that in this case, improvised security measures have to be put in place by the organization which is storing the data. Multiple records have to be stored so that if it gets deleted, you cannot go back to the customer to say, "Oh, I've deleted. We had a problem in the server. The hard disk wiped off, or went faulty, and we don't have your details. We need those details again." You cannot ask the customers to that data or fill that data again. So in this case, multiple measures have to be put in place to ensure not just the the sanctity of the data being stored on the system, but also to ensure that it is outside the reach of people who should not have access to that data. So the term that I want to introduce is, say, cybersecurity. So because everything is now available online and things can be posted online on the virtual world, sometimes availability of data can create disastrous conditions for consumers. Things like, because if you're stayed in a hotel and you're paid through a credit card or debit card, and if that detail gets in the hands of wrong people, they would misuse your details of debit or credit card, and that would mean you would lose money or payments that you're not even authorized and aware of, but somebody else is using them because they have access to your credit card information, which has been stored with the hotel.
Exactly.
There was a bit of a hack which happened, I think, with Marriott hotels, a couple of years back, which were in data hack, and that is, I think for about 500 million guests, in 2011, their servers were hacked, and basically the hackers would get away with records of 500 million customers, which were actually then posted on the internet. And these details had, which the access to the information that they were able to get were access to information included things like credit card addresses, even passport numbers, and how many times the guest had actually stayed in which location, and for how many days, what services they'd used. So a lot of records were actually, accessed during that particular attack. So when we look at this, security becomes very important is because this meant that there was not just loss of reputation, but also it meant that as a customer, you had to maybe look at quickly changing once you were notified by the hotel that this has actually happened. You have to look at changing your passwords, your credit cards, and other details so that you are not affected by it directly. But a lot of consumers got affected because this hack was not initially discovered or declared by the hotel. But a few months down the line, when they found out that this has happened, by that time, a lot of customers' data had actually gone free and was made available by hackers on the internet. So it was being sold by multiple people on the internet for various reasons, and that is where the importance of security comes in when we look at big hotel chains like Marriott, which consolidate data, in their central servers within the head office, and that has a lot of. So for us, for me, it does not explain probably the complexity, but when we look at what kind of data was available in that particular breach, it pretty much scares you because of the fact that, somebody could get hold of things like your name, date of birth, can create false identities, look at using your cards, and you won't even know where they are being used. So when we look at the importance of security here within this sector, there are certain steps which the organizations have to take and implement, and these steps mean that they have to ensure that the data being stored in their servers or on their machines is actually outside the reach of attackers or cyber attackers. And they need to also have fail-safe mechanisms. When you look at certain websites. Now, in the UK, an example, if you look at any banking website, the government has introduced a legislation which is called Cyber Essentials. Now, most websites in the UK which deal with money or money-related transactions need to have this particular mark, of kind of some sort of a certification mark, which gives consumers the confidence that the website that they are accessing and the data the website collects is stored safely and is not something which is available openly or cannot be breached by cyber attackers. So this particular certification is essential now, and this is a direct effect of legislation being introduced, say within the financial services sector. Now, in the tourism sector, you look at most holidays, for example, that you book. You look at something called holidays are ATHE protected. Have you heard of that word? ATHE protected.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at booking a ticket, when you look at booking a hotel, sometimes you will see in the adverts, the organizations would advertise that the holidays or the packages are ATHE protected. Now, ATHE stands for Air Travel Organizations Organizers License. That means people who provide these services to customers in terms of booking of hotels, travels, flights, whether different arrangements are under some sort of a regime or require some sort of a license to operate, and they are bound by a code of law, and that code of law is called ATHE or ATHOL in short. So this is primarily for air travel operators or airlines in particular, but because airlines offer now different types of services, as I mentioned earlier, these services are covered under the subsections of the ATHOL Act, and that is where when you book a holiday, if the company is to go bust and the holiday is, or your package that you booked is ATHOL protected, that means you will still be you'll be liable to get a full refund because the company has gone bust, which is none of your concerns or none which is related to you directly. So that gives you a bit of security when you book holidays with operators or airlines which have a membership or an accreditation from the Air Travel Organizers License or ATHOL in terms of their services that they offer. Now, there are other issues that we look at in terms of and we've taken say for example a few examples in some of the slides is to say why do organizations have faced security issues. So these security issues could be identified in two or three different types of points. One is by cyber attacks. That means there are criminals who are trying to get access to this data for various reasons of use, and that is where the data needs to be protected. Second, we look at legislation, and that legislation means that if we have the Data Protection Act enabled, that means staff who are responsible for ensuring that this data is kept safe have had proper training, understand how data needs to be used, recorded, retrieved, and saved so that it is outside the hands or reach of people who do not need to have access to that data. And the third bit that we look at is that in order to implement this, you have to have appropriate technology which needs to be applied, and that appropriation or use of technology to ensure that this data is outside the reach of people who do not need to have access to it would be through certain certifications or some sort of accreditations like ATHOL, Cyber Essentials, which are now mandated by the government on the online travel tour agencies website. So if I look at say travel, we look at travel supermarket. You look at bookings.com. When you look at some of these sites, they will advertise that we accept payments through credit cards, but they will have certain form of accreditation from the card companies, which will give you confidence and give you the peace of mind that whatever holidays that you're trying to book or are you going to be booking are going to be protected because they have relevant certifications or industry awarding affiliations in place, which makes it, for example, safe for you to do bookings or, buy, packages from there.
Yeah.
Okay. So at some place, somewhere, it should clearly mention that, so these are, for example, so let's look at, in this case, if you look at, there should be something somewhere that is going to be particularly obvious in terms of how data is collected, how data is stored, and what data is stored. So things like when they look at, collecting, so privacy, when I'm browsing the website, I've clicked on the OK button just a couple of seconds back, and if I need to look at what data is being stored, what things they're going to track when I'm on the website. So there are some terms and conditions, and the cookie policy, as we look at, in most websites, in online travel agencies, will clearly say what kind of data information they are storing and what kind of legislation they are adhering to when you're looking at making, transactions or doing bookings using, which are basically going to be financial transactions. And that gives you, peace of mind or security to say that with the implementation of the technology, this has allowed me to safely transact or, pay money, and I can be confident that when I paid, it will be a case that the organization receives the money and my booking is confirmed, and not a case of, okay, did you make the payment? We haven't got any confirmation. Where is the payment made? All those things will not be coming up, in terms of, questions.
Yeah.
Now, the second bit that we want to look at is why data is important and why, how do organizations make use of this data? So if I generally look at a question that why data is important, could you think of something? Why do you think in this industry, not in this industry in particular, but any services-oriented industry, why do we need to store data or have access to data of customers? Any ideas in terms of why do you want to have access to information or store this information?
If they want to store the information so they can so they can market to their customers later on, perhaps.
Absolutely spot on. So the reason, and in the services industry, I give you that hint, is when you look at services industry, the reason why you need to store the information is because you are looking at reselling or going back to the same customer again to reposition or sell a particular service. So when you take a holiday, you stayed in a hotel, the things like membership programs, loyalty cards, all these are basically developed instruments to ensure that you are able to look at keeping the customer in your ecosystem. And to keep that customer in your ecosystem, you need to capture a lot of information to get to know preferences, to get to know what their likes are, dislikes are, and then tailor services which can be provided in a very bespoke manner, which brings them back to your property or back to your place to spend more money. So things like when they capture details like when you stayed in a room, how many towels have you used, what have you used from the minimar, what movies have you watched, what was the items that you ordered in room service, if you made any phone calls. All this data is important is because they then know that this customer, typically comes in and when it stays or he or her stays, looks at taking and making these kind of use of services from the room. And that gives them idea to be able to send across marketing newsletters, mailers to or offers as we call them, to ensure that they are able to bring this customer back into the property, into the hotel, to be able to spend more money and obviously increase or give them more business. So the source of information and the collection of source of information can happen from different sources. As we look at front desk surveys, questionnaires, different types of receipts, other bits which are, all bits of information. But this information at some stage, when is stored onto the central server or maybe some place within the hotel, does provide a lot of background into the preferences of how customer would actually work or, say, for example, order things. And you get to know a bit more in terms of you get some insights into a bit more into how the customers would look at, coming and staying and, utilizing the services within a hotel. So the clear bit of that would be I will look at using demographics to understand whether this is a customer which can book a suite, double room, executive room, or a family room. So when you know that and the customer has stayed within the hotel, you have a lot of data available from a previous stay to ensure that, okay, the customer has 2 kids, maybe a family, looks at a family room, that's his budget, does not exceed that, does not order into it. And then when the mailers go out or the offers go out, they are tailored to ensure that, they cover some of these points which allow them to get more business from, that particular customer. So when this is stored onto the hotel servers, what we are looking at is that this data needs to be outside the hands of people, say, at the front desk, which have got nothing to do with it, maybe people in the administration, housekeeping, restaurant, things like that. But somebody at the back end would have access to this data, which is primarily going to be either in the marketing or the sales department, because they need to repeat sales or repeat, or they need to create offers which will allow the customer to come in and give them repeat sales and increase revenue. So data within the industry, when it is stored, one, the minimum requirement is that it needs to be encrypted and it needs to be secured safely, which means that it has to have access. Nobody needs to have access to it until it's authorized, but the access cannot be granted just by the use of simple access, but it will be password protected, or there'll be a set of let's say procedures that you'll have to go through to be able to get hold of that data. And even when we look at doing data mining, sometimes you will see some parts of the information about the customer are also not even shared with marketing department or the sales department, because they do not need access to that. Things like how did the customer pay, which card did they use, what was the card number, or details like passport, name, or maybe the age and date of birth is, to a certain extent, date of birth is hidden, but things like which are very personal things to the customer are also hidden from the sales and marketing department, because that might not be required for whatever usage the data is being used, even for say marketing or repeat sales purposes.
Right.
Now, a lot of agencies, a lot of hotels, a lot of companies also employ agencies, marketing agencies. So they have to provide at some stage access to this data outside the organization. Now, it might be the case that the hotel might not have a marketing team or a digital marketing team, say, for example, within the team itself within the hotel. So what they do is they utilize agency which looks after doing a lot of marketing advertising on behalf of that property or that hotel. So in those cases, that is where the selective filtering of information happens, and only the relevant data or data sets are provided which are utilized for marketing or sales purposes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The example that we looked at was why it is important, why it needs to be encrypted. When Marriott's hack was discovered, it was not encrypted data, and the data which had been stored on the servers, was available to the hackers as it is. And had there been, procedures in place to ensure that the data was password protected, had some encryption, and multiple copies of data were not stored across different hotels, then this would have not allowed the hackers to get away with what they got away in terms of the data of customers and the different types of data that they were able to get away with. So all this is required to be, put in place even before you start actually storing personal data. And the first steps to that we looked at was that when you go onto a particular website, they ask you to accept a cookie. So if you open a website for the first time, what they will ask you to do is accept a cookie, because from the internet itself, it can take a lot of data. Like, for example, I'm on Google Chrome. I'm signed into Google Chrome. Google Chrome is keeping track of all my activities, websites that I'm visiting. And because it has my name and my email address in it, if I go on and search, say, a particular thing on Kayak, and if it asks me to accept a cookie, that means the basic information about my things like my name, my email address, as you can see, it automatically recognizes who I am. You see?
Yeah.
Continue as Ramanjit saying. So it recognizes me, and this starts off because of the access to data now through the online travel agencies or through the internet. So that is where the correction has to start off, and these are mechanisms which are currently being built in or have been built into ensure that when you accept a cookie or when you accept certain terms and conditions of visiting a particular website, the data which is going to be stored by the company is going to be in accordance with the Data Protection Act or the legislation which the government has designed to ensure that it is going to be safe, and it is going to be the responsibility of the organization to keep and ensure that that data is kept. There are enough safeguards to keep that data safe, and the access to that information is only available to relevant people or persons who have authorization to access that data.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Now, in some cases, if the data is breached, then you as customer, as a consumer, I can also go after, file a suit, and there are terms and conditions which allow customers to recover monetary benefits if they feel that their data has been misutilized or utilized for these purposes which they have not authorized initially the company to collect on their behalf or sell their off. And one of the things that we noticed as an example, not directly related to this sector, but when we look at Facebook and we look at the cyber Analytica, the inquiry which was opened up on Facebook within the US by the US Senate and also within the European Union, and Mark Zuckerberg was asked to be present to answer questions of MPs, MEPs, and also the senators in the US, was that why did the organization sell this data which was utilized in campaigning in the last US elections? So that company has been closed. The Facebook has been fined. They have looked at issuing a public apology, and they said that we as custodians of data were not able to maintain those records, and when somebody logs in and creates an account and they do a check box for a particular, say that Facebook can share this data with third-party agencies, and underneath with that, somebody taking that checkbox allowed Facebook to sell that data for consumers for profit reasons to a third-party agency to make money, wherein you were only authorizing Facebook to store that data. So similarly, these kind of contingency measures have now been put into place within the travel and tourism sector as well, because within the services sector, they tend to store a lot of data, which can start off from just visiting the website to making a booking, to doing a rebooking, doing a cancellation, making payments online. And all this is now the responsibility of, because of the legislation being introduced, is, responsibility of the tour operator, the property or the type of operator which you are dealing with within this sector, to ensure that this data does not fall in the wrong hands. And if there is a breach to happen, then consumers have rights, which means that they can also be compensated or ask for compensation or ask the data to be deleted by this organization on sending a written request. All that is defined under the Data Protection Act.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Any questions on this so far?
No, it's okay.
Okay, so I think with this, probably we cover, this particular unit in a bit of detail. And what I'm going to do is just after the session, send you a copy of the recording and see if there is a handout which I can also share, which covers.
What I don't have is the assignment, is the scenario that's with the assignment brief.
Okay, let me have a quick look. It should be up on the website itself, but let's have a quick look right now. So if you see, that's the assignment brief here. The second document, second part of the document, is the assignment brief. It will be labeled as an assignment brief, which you should be able to access from Moodle itself. So let's have a look. Yep. So that's the assignment brief which is there, that we discussed this morning.
The assignment brief, yeah, I've got.
Yeah, so that's there. And then there's a bit of a handout which we have created already, which is available here on LO4, which basically talks about the impact of internet implementation of technologies. And we've taken an example of the Hilton group of hotels in terms of what they've done, primarily looking at, from a point of view of security and implementation of IT within the group. So I spoke to you about the CRS, customer reservation system, and then the PEST in the beginning, and that is something that we can look at reading in a bit more detail, because it will give you not just the theoretical background but also apply one of the frameworks in this. There are a few that are covered: Porter's 5 forces, PESTO, and I think there's another one which I've covered towards the end, which is the marketing mix, which allows you to understand why technology is important in terms of marketing activities, and also how it is being currently used by Hilton hotels in the case study.
Okay, now I found it. Sorry, I downloaded the assignment brief only and didn't have the array with it. Excuse me.
Good stuff. No problem. So if you have any questions or you think of any questions, do let me know. You can drop me an email and I'll come straight back to you. With regards to your availability, if you let us know the next available dates, I'm going to try and align maybe another lecture to try and start off and cover another unit, which will be with regards to the say one of the other modules.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So now I just proceed and I submit work as I see.
Yes, that's correct. So if you start working on the assignment brief for this particular unit, and then let us know your availability for the next session, then we are going to start off with another unit in terms of starting the teaching and delivery. It could be any other unit we'll start off.
So the next session would be just to
start the next unit.
The next unit, okay.
Next unit, yeah.
And any queries and any information I need regarding the work, I have the email, the learner
work, yeah. If you send that on learner work, most probably because this unit I have taught, I'll pick up that query and I'll answer. But when you start reading some of the other units and maybe one or two other lectures are involved, they will pick it up as a first instant to basically answer that query. But if not, then I myself, there's Sanjay. There are 2 online tutors which will pick it up, and you will get a response pretty much instantly on the inquiry when you send that across.
Okay. And any work I submit through the learner work email?
Yes, yeah. The reason that is a working mailbox for us, in which we get most of the emails coming from the learners, and what tends to happen in this case is that it gets forwarded to the relevant tutor who's teaching that particular unit, but also is a central repository where you get a receipt that the inquiry has been received, so you get an automatic receipt, and it works like a ticketing system for us, but also a central repository, just in case if you have to refer back or go back and forth to see what has happened, it's easier for us to track.
Okay.
So you get that recording uploaded shortly when it becomes available, on the system. You should be able to access that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Good stuff. So thanks so much for joining the session, Peter. I'll catch up with you next week if I'm doing this second unit. If not, then one of my colleagues, Anjum, who will be picking up one of the units like strategic marketing, he will probably start off this session with you, and then in the meanwhile, you are also working on the assignment for the unit that you've completed with me.
Does it suit you guys for me to finish a unit and then begin a next unit, or you do it kind of at the same time?
We do it concurrently. I don't think we'd stop the process of delivering the sessions. You've got 2 weeks to be able to complete the assignment on this in terms of a bit of a timeline, so that you are slightly under a bit of a pressure and a timeline that you're working towards completing this assignment rather than leaving it towards the end to complete all the assignments. So you've got 2 weeks. If you feel that you want to submit the assignment and then start the sessions, we can do that approach as well. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
So let us know what suits you, because the idea is you need to be able to, there's no point in creating a backward pressure. If you feel that you're comfortable with doing 1 unit, completing it off, signing it off, then that's the way we'll proceed. But if you feel you want to continue the sessions and start going through the other units as well, in the meanwhile you're able to submit the assignment parallelly, that would also work for us.
Right, okay. Understood.
Right? Good stuff. So I'm going to stop recording.